Good evening and welcome to this Monday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, vote early, not often. Of course, the joke around Cook County, Illinois has always been vote early and often. Chicago's curious ballot customs notwithstanding, Illinois is among 33 of our 50 states allowing voters to cast ballots early and in person. Some of those same states are among the 27 that allow early voting by mail, and 3 of our states, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, only allow mail-in ballots. There is no in-person voting. Brings a whole new meaning to the expression mailing it in. It also means that mail fraud and vote fraud can go hand in hand. The problem is obvious. How can you prove the ballot sent to a voter is actually marked by that voter? In-person early voting is okay by me, and I found that Florida really goes the extra mile to check to make sure you are who you say you are. Fact is, whether it's early or on election day, unless and until all states follow Florida's example of requiring valid voter ID, questions about vote fraud will remain in Cook County and coast to coast. At least that's the way I see it. We're now down to the final 15 days, and yet some media outlets would like you to believe Hillary Clinton has already finished first. But, as Miranda Kahn shows us, this race is far from over.
JD, yeah, don't expect to see a Hillary Clinton victory lap just yet. If we've learned anything this election cycle, it's that anything is possible, and that includes the idea of Trump winning the gold.
Our campaign represents the kind of change that only arrives once in a lifetime.
Donald Trump continues to make the rounds in key states like Florida, a state that history has shown us can determine the outcome of an election.
Your vote really counts. You can consider me as an exhibit A of that truth.
Right now, polls show Hillary Clinton outshining Donald Trump in the Sunshine State, but that isn't dimming Trump's prospects or his confidence.
We're going to win the great state of Florida.
If you watch mainstream media outlets over the weekend, you might think there's no pathway to victory for Trump.
Many in the media are already calling this election over.
Karl Rove even saying he no longer thinks Trump winning is possible.
Clinton's going to win a very similar victory to Obama 2008.
But what you may not hear,
Investors Business Daily just announced that we are leading nationally.
there's also early voting, which according to Hillary Clinton's running mate showed the Democrats at an advantage.
We like the early voting activity and the absentee ballot requests coming in other states.
But absentee requests don't mean states like Florida, Iowa, Ohio will suddenly turn blue, especially when you consider many of those states are reporting there are many newly registered Republican voters who typically turn out on Election Day.
Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.
And Trump may also want to thank independents. You heard the GOP presidential nominee mention that Investors Business Daily tracking poll. That same poll not only shows him in dead heat nationally, but it shows him leading with independents by a 41% to 32% margin.
Miranda, as we get closer, there is growing concern in other areas. For example, the use of voting machines tied to a business that has been funded, at least in part, by leftist billionaire George Soros. It's known as Smartmatic. That's the company. It's in the United Kingdom. It provides voting machines for 16 states, including battlegrounds such as Florida and Arizona. The chairman of that company is also on the board of Soros Open Society Foundation, and he has ties to the Clintons through his work at 2 consulting firms. Yeah. So this all gets to be a bit suspicious.
Yes, and it definitely feeds into Trump's narrative that the system could be rigged against him as well.
Miranda, there is more to talk about on this subject. Ed Berliner has a historical perspective on it a bit later. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Well, with all this talk about voter fraud and what's to come, let's turn our attention now to our prestigious political panel. First, Skyping in from New York City, the former Lieutenant Governor of the Empire State, Betsy McCaughey. And Skyping in from the West Coast, the son of Ronald Reagan, political commentator Michael Reagan. Michael, of course, the author of the book Lessons My Father Taught Me, The Strength, Integrity, and Faith of Ronald Reagan. And as always, you can find and follow Michael on Twitter. His handle is @ReaganWorld. So we could talk voter fraud, but let me just put this up on the shelf for a second, Betsy, and begin with you. The alphabets are all out there acting like it's all over. But that noted political scientist Yogi Berra told us it's not over till it's over.
Well, that's right. And there are three things that we should look for. First of all, the current polls do not measure voter enthusiasm, voter intensity. And Trump appears to be way ahead in that department. Even the Clinton campaign is very worried that her voters may not turn out. Secondly, the way these polls are done, some polls deliberately oversample groups that are likely to vote Democratic. For example, African Americans or Hispanics or newly naturalized citizens. And so that adds an additional bias. And let me say, in response to your mention of George Soros, far more troubling than the voting machines are the millions that George Soros is putting into distorting this race through Priorities USA and other PACs that are contrary to the law, closely coordinating with the Clinton campaign to stir up violence at Trump rallies and to make it look like there's something wrong with the Trump campaign.
I mean, George Soros has been like that for many, many years. He goes around the world trying to upset every country he absolutely goes out and touches. When I was in Poland a few years ago, the president of Poland was worried about George Soros and the part he was playing in Obama taking away the missile defense system that, in fact, they had. Soros is a cancer on American politics and any politics he, in fact, touches. And he's touching this campaign like anybody else. I'm not surprised by ABC, NBC, CBS, or any one of those calling it for Trump. They've never been on the side of conservatism at all. So what you have to do is you have to play the card that Trump is playing about fraud and what have you. You want to make sure that your group, your people, get to the polls on election day. You don't want the ABCs, NBCs, and CBSs and CNNs to, in fact, stop your group from showing up on election day. You want them to be excited about showing up and not lose because you decide to stay home.
A couple of
polls.
Let
me add.
Go ahead.
Let me add that Hillary's now notorious comment, the basket of deplorables, that is straight out of the George Soros playbook. He put $6 million into distorting the European parliamentary elections 2 years ago, fomenting a lot of anger against people he depicted as xenophobes, Islamophobes, racists, just like he's telling Hillary Clinton to do now.
As we take a look at some polls, there are a couple that haven't gotten a lot of attention that command our attention on this program. First of all, a look at the swing state of North Carolina. The Monmouth University poll shows the statistical dead heat in the Tar Heel state. Meanwhile, the latest national poll from Investors Business Daily, that's the daily tracking poll that was the most accurate in the last presidential campaign, again has a dead heat. Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Trump tied at 42%. Now, what's also interesting, Michael, is their new batch of emails released by WikiLeaks shedding light on the long-term concerns of poll rigging. A newly leaked email exposes Clinton campaign chair John Podesta's playbook for rigging polls using oversamples, and that's what Donald Trump was talking about earlier today in Palm Beach, Florida. Let's look and listen.
They show these phony polls where they look at Democrats, and it's heavily weighted with Democrats, and then they'll put on a poll where we're not winning, and everybody says, oh, they're not winning. It's a heavily weighted poll with Democrats, like the ABC phony poll that just came out. Totally phony poll.
And so Mr. Trump says the whole object, Michael, is voter suppression on his side. Is that a valid observation from Mr. Trump?
Yeah, it's a valid observation. Certainly it is. That's what they want to do. They don't want all those excited people to show up on Tuesday, November 8th. They want to suppress it as much as they can, make you feel like it's over, it's done, and what have you. And that's what they're trying to do. Listen, you know I haven't been a big supporter. Both of you know I haven't been a big supporter of Donald Trump. I think the campaign he's run has been absolutely abysmal. But you know what? I'm going to show up and vote for Donald Trump on Tuesday, November 8th, because if we don't, the middle class of this country will no longer exist.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to hear you say that, Michael. I want to embrace you all across the United States. This is our chance to finally put the Washington establishment and its media toadies in their place.
There is something else that Mr. Trump did this weekend to change the tone and tenor of his campaign. He went to Gettysburg and offered a Trumpian Gettysburg address that, quite frankly, sounded like something I did with my fellow Republicans 22 years ago on the west front of the Capitol. A contract with America, we called it. He called it a contract between Donald J. Trump and the American voter. And the key thing about this, in his first 100 days, he says he wants to see term limits, an amendment for term limits, and also find a way to have rational regulations. The way he put it was, for every new regulation adopted, 2 should be taken off the books. Betsy, like the contract with America in '94, will this have dramatic results for Donald Trump in 2 weeks? Got about 30 seconds.
Well, I believe it will. And in addition to all those listening who are suffering under Obamacare, the huge premiums, the outrageous deductibles, or you're getting clobbered with that big penalty because you can't even afford Obamacare, vote for Donald Trump and you won't have to buy it anymore.
And go ahead, Michael, very quickly.
You need to move Obamacare to the top of the heap, not third in line. Listen, my daughter-in-law just had a baby 9 months ago, just got told that her premium is going to go to $1,000 a month starting November 1st. I don't know how she and her son will afford it.
So much for affordable health care, right? That's Obamacare's official name. Looks like the joke's on us. Hey, look, we're out of time right now. I want you to stay put. When we come back, more with Betsy and Michael on a busy Monday here on Newsmax Prime. Welcome back. As noted earlier, the current campaign is replete with charges and countercharges of vote fraud. But historically speaking, as Ed Berliner reports, it's nothing new.
1 vote for McCain. Thank you.
No, I want to vote for Obama.
2 votes for McCain.
Come on, it's time for a change.
3 votes for McCain.
No, no, no!
6 votes for President McCain.
Hey, I only meant 1 of those votes for McCain. This machine is rigged!
While many would choose to believe what happens in Springfield is endemic to the rest of America when it comes to fixing elections, reality in this case, as in many issues, is somewhere down the middle, invoking a line from a very famous television series. The truth is out there.
There are a few places where they've been notorious for stealing votes. Pennsylvania, Chicago. There have been places where a lot of cheating has gone on over the years. I know that from my own knowledge of busing people in from Camden. When I ran for mayor of New York City the first time, some people voted 8 and 10 times.
Let us not be naive here. Voting irregularities do happen here in America and in every location around the world where people vote. As a matter of fact, a good deal of what some call rigging is actually legal in every state. It's called gerrymandering.
Every 10 years, politicians redraw the districts that pick the House and state legislatures. But here's the problem. The politicians that are elected by those districts are the same politicians that redraw the districts. It's an insane conflict of interest because it allows political parties to choose the outcomes of elections years in advance.
One of the more publicized voter fraud events happened in 1982, where more than 60 people in Chicago, including precinct captains, sought to invoke the long, sordid past of that city and county, indicted by a grand jury for stuffing ballot boxes and buying votes. The U.S. Attorney General estimated the Democrats manufactured at least 100,000 votes, and in the end, most were convicted of election fraud. It happens, no secret, plenty of history. But on the scale some are claiming in this November run-up, that is a contentious issue for which the facts presented by both sides rarely agree. J.D., it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Ed. Let's continue our conversation now from New York City via Skype. It's former New York Lieutenant Governor Betsy McCaughey, and from Southern California, political commentator Michael Reagan. Lady and gentlemen, Reince Priebus, the RNC chairman, appeared on CBS's Face the Nation Sunday, and he says that Donald Trump's concerns about voter fraud are indeed valid. Let's look and listen.
I'm telling you, we know this is not millions of people, but what we're talking about are things like, if you look at the Milwaukee police report that came out about 6 years ago. The Milwaukee Police Department put out a 70-page report on election fraud in Milwaukee. This wasn't the Republican Party putting out the report. What I'm telling you is that this is real. So let's not go down this road where we're acting like this is some figment of people's imagination.
But I think
So, Michael, there you have Reince Priebus. We heard from Ed Berliner in that notorious gubernatorial race in 1982 in Illinois, and we saw the depth of the cheating there where people went to jail. Why is it, and we talked about it earlier, but this need on the part of corporate media to somehow belittle concerns about vote fraud?
Well, they do that. They always will do that. But let me just say something else. I'm just thinking, listening to the setup and listening to you and what have you. Here we are talking about voter fraud. And that's now become the #1 issue in the campaign. And that's what bothers me, is we keep on catching these flyers and talking about things. Yes, voter fraud will probably happen, not to the extent that maybe Donald Trump thinks it's going to happen. But the reality, it has now become the #1 issue to talk about. Instead of talking about Obamacare, instead of talking about ISIS, instead of talking about the things that really should be upfront and important to people. I'm not going to go to the polls and vote based on what I think about fraud. I'm going to go to the polls and vote about what I think about ISIS, what I think about Obamacare, what I think about what's happening in this country that we live in today. And those are the things that concern me. And I think when we spend too much time on voter fraud, we're doing a disservice to the electorate who want to go out and vote on real issues.
I agree, but let me point out that the reason the Democratic Party is against even hearing any discussion of voter fraud is that fraudulent voters break 80-20 for Democrats. That's what the Cooperative Congressional Election Study showed. It's quoted in the Washington Post. There's no bias to this. The reason Democrats don't want to discuss voter fraud is that voter fraud benefits the Democratic Party.
There is something else.
What I worry about, if I could jump in,
Yes,
Jane,
sir, go ahead.
By putting it so front and center and putting it in that direction, you know what I'm concerned about? I am concerned if Donald Trump does not win on Tuesday, November 8th. There is going to be rioting across this country from those people who support Donald Trump because they will feel more than anything else they were cheated in the election process, and they will only be thinking not Obamacare, only thinking about fraud instead of thinking about a lot of other issues.
Well, they should be thinking about fraud and making sure that the vote is honest and putting pressure on local elected officials to prevent fraud. But I agree with you. The #1 issues here are the economy and national safety.
But beyond that, there is a point of synergy, if you will, panelists, and it's this. Hillary has been proven so corrupt. Hillary has been at the core of this, and you cannot divorce the corruption and the tendencies toward voter fraud away from the Democrats and what they've done. For example, right outside Washington, D.C. in Maryland, there's a whole lot of hanky-panky about to go on. Jack Berkman appeared with me earlier today on America Talks Live. Jack, of course, is based in Washington, and there across the district line in the state of Maryland, the old line state, doesn't look like things are on the level. Let's listen to what Jack had to say, then we'll get your reaction.
There are more than 200,000 people on the Maryland voter rolls who no longer live in Maryland, and those are just the ones they have found. This is fraud on a level that, my God, there's not another state in the country that could even dream of this. Even in Chicago, Mayor Daley couldn't have dreamt of doing anything like this. They're getting desperate in Maryland.
And the reason Jack says they're getting desperate is because, imagine this, a Republican got elected governor in their last gubernatorial election. And as we know, Maryland has been traditionally a Democrat state. But let me tell you where the real concern came. It came when I was in Congress. Different municipalities within Maryland decided if you live here, even if you're not a citizen, you can vote in our municipal elections. And that was the beginning of what turned out to be allowing everybody to vote. It was amplified through motor voter, and where they found the problem was when they went to get folks in the jury pool and they would draw it from the voters' records. They'd ask the people, are you citizens? And those registered voters coming in for jury duty said no, they were not. And so that's a problem that Pat McDonough, who's running for Congress as a delegate in the state house, is trying to change. So it is something that is real. But again, Michael, you're saying there's a real danger with concentrating on this.
I concentrate on, I worry about, riots in the streets if, in fact, Trump loses, even fair and square if he loses. But talk about fraud. I live in the state of California. You realize I don't have a Republican to vote for? Because in our primaries, the top 2 vote getters go on to the general election. And in both the Senate and the House, top vote getters, both Democrats, I don't have a Republican to vote for. What kind of fraudulent operation is that?
Well, it's the evil of 2 lessers.
What? It's tough.
It's the evil of 2 lessers.
Yeah, it's very sad. It's called in slang the jungle primary, where you put everybody into one primary. It's done in states where there is a huge majority for one party, and that way they ensure one party rule. And that's been the object lesson from California in terms of allowing all the illegals in, and now what you've seen up in Sacramento. You view it from afar, Betsy. Your take as where we're heading.
I can see in the Project Veritas tapes that came out last week, and now 2 complaints have been filed with the Federal Election Commission. 2 very compelling complaints that Hillary Clinton's campaign is conspiring with third-party groups and PACs to steal this election. She's using millions of dollars of George Soros money that should not be directly spent by a campaign, and yet her campaign is actively, directly engaged in deciding how that money is spent, and it's being spent creating agitation at Trump events and discrediting Trump events with violence.
And we will have to leave it there, but suffice it to say, this is going to grow even more interesting heading down the home stretch here in these final 2 weeks. Michael Reagan from Southern California, Betsy McCaughey from New York City, our thanks to you both for joining us via Skype. Now, when we come back, Trump supporters and YouTube sensations Diamond and Silk will join us next. That and a lot more as Newsmax Prime continues.